The Cleveland Browns finished the 2024 season with a 3-14 record and missed the playoffs for the third time in the last 4 years. It was a very frustrating year for the Browns as Deshaun Watson was borderline unplayable, and in the 7 games he played last year, the team failed to put up 20 points and were just 1-6 through 7 games.
Let's address the elephant in the room. We took a big swing and miss with Deshaun. We thought we had the quarterback. We didn't.
Jameis Winston came in and led the Browns to a shocking 29-24 win over the Ravens in Week 8, in a game Jameis would throw for over 330 yards and 3 touchdowns against the future division champions. The Browns won just one game after the month of November started, which was against the Steelers on a Thursday night game in Week 12, before losing the final 6 games of the year and ultimately finishing with the number 2 pick in the 2025 draft. And when you take a look at the 2024 Browns, well, it was pretty easy to see why they struggled. They finished dead last in points per game, they had a minus 22 turnover margin, and they had 4 quarterbacks start for them last year in Deshaun Watson, Jameis Winston, Dorian Thompson-Robinson, and Bailey Zappi. And to make matters worse for this team, the 2025 quarterback draft class was not a great class the way 2024 was. This team put up 19 or more points in just 3 games in 2024, and needless to say, there was a lot of questions entering this offseason, and I'll be honest, I think there's still a lot of questions heading into 2025. But how will the Cleveland Browns do this year? Well, we're going to break everything down in today's video. If you could like the video before we start, I would really appreciate it, and without further ado, let's begin. And we are starting today's video by discussing who the Browns brought in and who they lost this offseason. One of the biggest things that has to be remembered with NFL free agency pertaining to specific teams is what they can realistically do heading into free agency. Not every team can be free agency winners, and not every team is going to spend $100 million on either Milton Williams or Sam Darnold the way the Patriots and Seahawks did this offseason. And whenever you think of the Browns salary cap situation, obviously you think of one player and one specific contract, and I get it. Deshaun Watson has a $35 million cap hit this year, and he probably will not play a game for the Browns in 2025, and even if he does, at least based on what we saw last year, well, he was bad. But the surprising part about the Browns free agency cycle this year was they had over $67 million in dead cap money, meaning there was $67 million allocated against the cap for the Browns for players that are not going to play for them. And for clarity, that's in addition to the Deshaun Watson contract, meaning the Browns have over $100 million allocated to players that will not play for them this year, or very little if at all in Deshaun Watson's case. Amari Cooper has a $22.5 million dead cap hit, Za'Darius Smith has a $14 million dead cap hit, Jedrick Wills has an $11.8 million dead cap hit, and Dalvin Tomlinson has a $7 million dead cap hit, and this is all per Spotrac.com. So having said all of this, naturally the Browns were going to be pretty limited in terms of what they were going to be able to do and who they were going to be able to bring in. And the highest contract they gave out this offseason, aside from bringing Myles Garrett back, of course, was signing veteran defensive lineman Malik Collins. They gave Malik Collins a 2-year, $20 million contract with 13 guaranteed, and I like this signing for what it is. He's a guy who can come in and push the pocket and generate anywhere from 35 to 45 pressures and be a good presence in the middle of the defense on clear pass rushing downs. He's not great against the run, but he can get after the quarterback. And he is 30 years old, so this is more of a 1-year, or at most given his contract, a 2-year stopgap player before they continue to hit this position in the draft, as they of course drafted Michigan's Mason Graham this year. They also brought in former first-round pass rusher Joe Tryon-Shoyinka from the Bucs on a 1-year, $4.7 million deal, and I'll be honest, I'm not a big JTS fan, and there is a reason Tampa let him walk in free agency. Pass rushers are obviously at a premium in today's NFL, and if he were that good, then he would still be in Tampa. And my main point here with JTS is to have realistic expectations. They also brought back Joe Flacco, the 2023 Comeback Player of the Year, and the man who will be the opening day starter for the Browns in 2025 on a 1-year, $4.2 million deal. Flacco is 40 years old, and the Browns quarterback room entering 2025, well, it's certainly a room, and Flacco will start the year leading the pack. One signing I did like for Cleveland that I hope works out in the long run is guard Tevin Jenkins, who came over from the Bears. Tevin signed a 1-year, $3 million deal and is currently backing up Joel Bitonio, and with Bitonio turning 34 in October, I like the idea of Tevin eventually replacing him. And in free agency, they lost defensive tackle Dalvin Tomlinson, who signed with the Cardinals, 2 players who signed with the Giants in offensive tackle James Hudson and quarterback Jameis Winston, as well as safety Juan Thornhill signing with the Steelers, receiver Elijah Moore signing with the Bills, and longtime running back Nick Chubb signing with the Houston Texans. The biggest thing with the 2025 Browns is to have realistic expectations and recognize that in a lot of ways, this is a transition year, and that's exactly how their free agency looked this past spring. And before we continue, I ask the question, are you looking to buy, sell, trade, or rip cards? Personally, I love opening packs of cards, and I really love opening packs of cards right as or right before the rookie season starts for each said player. And back in 2019, I actually opened this Dexter Lawrence signed card when he was coming out of college in the 2019 draft process, and that card has aged pretty well, and Dexter Lawrence is one of the best players we have in today's NFL. And if you like opening cards too, well, Arena Club is changing the hobby with their original slab packs and no-fee auctions. And with the slab packs, you can rip a pack for as low as $25 and hit on a card that's worth significantly more. And with every slab pack, Arena Club will make you an instant offer based on its market value, meaning there's no guessing or waiting a couple of hours. No, you get an instant offer from Arena Club based on the card's estimated fair market value. I absolutely love opening cards, and I actually pulled a JJ McCarthy Gem Mint 10 and a Caleb Williams 9.5 rookie while making this video. And right now, you can go to arenaclub.com/GFB and use code GFB to get 20% off your first slab pack or card purchase at arenaclub.com/GFB. Once again, that's arenaclub.com/GFB for 20% off your first slab pack or card purchase, and a big thank you to Arena Club for sponsoring today's video. Now, for the Browns defense entering 2025, this is a unit that I would absolutely be shocked if it doesn't improve for a few reasons. Obviously, the 2024 Browns offense was a disaster for most of the year. I mean, you don't accidentally score 19 points in just 3 of 17 games, and you don't accidentally have 34 turnovers over the course of the year either. And because of this, the Browns defense was hung out to dry more often than not. And for reference, the Browns offense had the 31st average time per drive and were also 29th in average plays per drive. They were 29th in rushing DVOA, and when you cannot sustain drives, as well as not being able to run the football offensively, you are at best treading water. And a lot of the time in those situations, you are one play away from more or less having to wave the white flag because, simply put, you can't score points as an offense consistently. And the reason we bring all of this up with the Browns defense is I don't think they were that bad last year. No, they weren't a top 3 or 4 unit or even top 10, but they weren't as bad as you'd think. Funnily enough, I think the worst game of the year they played was against the Saints of all teams in Week 11, when they were coming off of their bye and allowed 138 rushing yards and 3 rushing touchdowns to Taysom Hill of all players. And as we enter 2025, they placed a big emphasis on their front 7 by drafting Mason Graham at number 5 overall, and by drafting linebacker Carson Swessinger at the top of the 2nd round. And with how many great running backs there were across the NFL last year, one thing a lot of teams did this offseason, Cleveland included, despite having limited resources, was invest in the defense to try and be able to consistently stop the run. The Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah situation is unfortunate, and Browns fans knew that was largely the reason for the Swessinger selection, but I do like the idea of where the Browns' run defense is heading into the year. Now, just being honest, I do think from a cumulative stats standpoint that the Browns' defense will finish in the bottom 10 in 2025, largely based on game flow, because I do think they'll be down in a lot of games this year, meaning teams will run the football on them quite a bit, but I do want to acknowledge, or at least that I see the vision for what they are trying to accomplish, and the bottom 10 part was the rushing statistics. The pass rush is, of course, led by future Hall of Famer Myles Garrett, and with Myles Garrett, guys, there isn't enough good things that can be said about him. He is coming off of 4 straight seasons of 14 or more sacks, and has been a first-team All-Pro player in 4 of the last 5 years. He now has over 100 career sacks and is a legit one-of-one player. Outside of Myles Garrett, Malik Collins, Mason Graham, and Alex Wright will all be getting after the quarterback. Alex Wright is coming off of a torn triceps injury and is in a contract year, so if he is ever going to break out, this would be the year. Any unit with Myles Garrett has a pretty high floor for a team getting after the quarterback, and again, I am reasonably optimistic with this defense entering the year. They only forced 12 turnovers in all of 2024, which ranked 30th in the NFL, and only intercepted 4 passes for the entire year. So I do believe that will increase really by default in 2025, and that's one of the reasons why I think the Browns are going to be more serviceable than people think. The front seven of this defense is no slouch. Now, admittedly, I do have some concerns with the secondary outside of Denzel Ward, and if there is one weak point with the Browns defense, or at least not as strong as the front seven, I do think it's the corner room. I also acknowledge that you can say this about nearly every team, corner depth that is, but this is where I have concerns with the 2025 Browns defense. But if they can at least be serviceable, then I think we're talking about a defense that would finish in the 14-19 range. With the 2025 Browns rookie impact, it's of course going to start with Mason Graham, who was the 5th pick in the draft, and what we should go ahead and address right out of the gate is the fact the Browns traded out of Travis Hunter, and they also acquired a top 40 pick this year, which they used on running back Quinshon Judkins, which we'll discuss in a minute, as well as acquiring a first-round pick next year. And with the first 2 picks in Mason Graham and linebacker Carson Schlesinger, you can at least start to see the vision of what the Browns want to build over the next couple of years, and as we transition from the mid-2020s to eventually the late 2020s. And with Mason Graham and Carson Schlesinger, these were players that you hope to be pillars of the defense for the next couple of years and floor-raising players that ultimately I think both will become. Mason Graham was a really good defensive tackle prospect, and to me was by every definition a good, solid first-round defensive tackle prospect. Out of any of the defensive tackles over the past couple of years, I would say he was definitely behind Quinnen Williams and Jalen Carter coming out, but he was still a really good prospect. And whenever you have a good interior pass rushing prospect or even an edge rushing prospect go to Cleveland, you can't help but want to project the best, knowing that Myles Garrett is going to be on the opposite side, and obviously the opposing offense will always focus on Myles Garrett more than they will Mason Graham, specifically in pass rushing situations. So I hope that we get to see a couple of games over the next year or two, hopefully 3 years, where Myles Garrett has 2 sacks, Mason Graham has a sack and a half, and they combine for 16 or 17 pressures, and you really see them force havoc on opposing offensive lines. For Mason Graham specifically in the 2025 season, and ultimately his 22-year-old rookie season, I would really be ecstatic if he finished the year with 45 or 50 total tackles, as well as anywhere from 4 to 6 sacks. Remember, the defensive tackle position is not a sexy position, so I would not expect Mason Graham to come in and have a huge impact. I'm not going to say, an Aaron Donald impact, but a huge impact and win the Defensive Rookie of the Year, largely because the Defensive Rookie of the Year and even the Defensive Player of the Year a lot of the time is a sack-based award. So Mason Graham probably will not have the flashiest rookie year by any stretch of the imagination, especially on the stat sheet, but this is a player that you can really start to see the vision for what the Browns want to build, not only in 2025, but as we move into the late 20s as well, and the same also applies to Carson Schlesinger. Now, with Carson Schlesinger, if you go back to the live stream of day 2 of the 25 draft, you'll see that I was initially disappointed with the selection, and it's for a couple of reasons. I wasn't factoring in the JOK situation, and I also wanted the Browns to desperately draft Luther Burden. That way they could have another explosive receiver in the offense, and that way they could walk out of the draft with both Mason Graham and Luther Burden, and I thought that would have been a tremendous haul for the Browns. And by the way, we still gave the Browns an A draft grade, so I still thought they did a really good job, all things considered. But with Schlesinger, like with Mason Graham, now that I've had a couple of months to digest and especially factor in the JOK situation, which I admittedly was not from the start, I thought this was a really good selection, and that this is, like Mason Graham as well, a floor-raising player that over the next couple of years, you are not going to be amongst the worst in the NFL, or you're not going to have a bottom 10 defense, because you have multiple floor raisers on this defense. And again, like we said with the Mason Graham selection and via the trade back to get Mason Graham, you can start to see the vision of what the Browns want to do over the next couple of years. So ultimately, I do think Carson Schlesinger will be a pretty productive rookie, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if he has over 110 tackles this year, as well as 2 or 3 sacks, a couple of interceptions. And if everything goes according to plan, based on the production that I think Schlesinger will have, he will probably be in the Rookie of the Year conversation. Now, with Quinshon Judkins, I'm not going to pretend that I have any knowledge on the situation, but what I will say, as I am recording this on Wednesday, August 27th, the video is being released Saturday, August 30th, is that Right now, the Browns have 2 running backs on their 53-man roster. No team in the NFL has just 2 running backs on their 53-man roster. So right now, it looks to that the Browns are either going to sign Quinshon Judkins and that everything is going to, from this summer, kind of pass over. And from a football standpoint, he'll be back on the field sooner rather than later. I don't know if there's going to be a suspension or anything, but right now, it looks like that Quinshon Judkins is eventually going to play, we just don't know when, and I'll just kind of leave it at that. But for the player that Quinshon Judkins is, again, we go back to what the Browns want to implement over the next couple of years, which is going to be a sound, tough football team, and Judkins certainly applies within that, and he's a player that if he is going to be 100% and he plays all 17 games, I really like the idea of him and Dylan Sampson in this offense, and I actually tweeted during the draft as it was happening that drafting both Judkins and Sampson was a tremendous haul for Cleveland, and I absolutely love the decision, again, from a football standpoint, and I'll just kind of leave it at that. And I really like the idea of what this team was building when they drafted both Quinshon Judkins and Dylan Sampson. Harold Fannin Jr. was a prospect I liked a lot coming out of Bowling Green, and he was a player that I saw in person last year at Penn State, and, admittedly, I was not the most in tune with a Bowling Green tight end going into Penn State, but he dropped an 11 for 137 and a touchdown stat line against Penn State, and that was going to be a player I was going to keep an eye on for the rest of the year. And then the following week, Bowling Green plays Texas A&M, and he dropped an 8 for 145 stat line, and pretty quickly we're looking at a really solid tight end prospect who's also very uniquely built, because Fannin is not built like a lot of other tight ends, and he's a player that I think will translate to the NFL eventually, but pertaining to the 2025 NFL season for the Browns preview and his 21-year-old age season, I don't know if he's going to produce all that much, and it's not really a knack on him specifically. It's kind of just due to the fact that Jerry Jeudy just had over 1,000 yards for the Browns. David Njoku is a Pro Bowl tight end, and whenever you go down the food chain, if you will, or however many targets each player is going to get, there's always going to be a limitation for Harold Fannin in his rookie season. But again, I go back to the vision of what the Browns are trying to build with rock-solid football players, and think he definitely applies within that. So I would consider it a successful rookie season for Fannin if he has anywhere in that 40 reception area, around 450 yards, maybe anywhere from 3 to 5 touchdowns, and I would consider that a pretty good year for him. But ultimately, he is only 21 years old, so this is a player that should be around for not just the next 2 or 3 years, but if he pans out, anywhere from the next 6, 7, 8, 9 years, and a player that should stay in the state of Ohio for a very long time. And that pretty much wraps up the Browns rookie impact. Oh yes, they also drafted 2 quarterbacks in Dylan Gabriel and Shedeur Sanders. With Dylan Gabriel and Shedeur Sanders, we will break this down more during the offensive portion of the video as well. Anybody right now that is sitting here saying, hey, Joe Flacco is only going to start the first 2 games before the Browns have had enough, then Dylan Gabriel is going to start the next 2 games before they realize that he's not that good, and Shedeur Sanders is going to start the remaining 13 games, and he's going to take over the Browns franchise and be the starter for the next 10 years. Anybody that is talking with that much confidence in any direction, whether Dylan Gabriel's their guy, although obviously Shedeur Sanders has a lot more fans and a lot more vocal fans on social media than Dylan Gabriel. Anybody talking with that much confidence, I'll just be honest, I don't think anybody has any idea what's going to happen with the Browns situation this year. And pertaining to both Dylan Gabriel and Shedeur Sanders' rookie impact, I do think each player will start games at some point. To the exact quantity, I nor anyone knows at this point, but I do think the Browns will have at least 3 starting quarterbacks for them in the 2025 season. Now, with the Cleveland Browns offense, I will be honest, the title of today's video of having concerns with the Browns relates directly to the Browns offense, and it has nothing to do with the Deshaun Watson contract and the first-round picks traded, and oh my gosh, they still have the financial ramifications. I don't really worry about that anymore, specifically the financial part, because if you just keep pushing and kicking the can down the road, the number, while it still may be 40 or 50 million, in theory, it's less than the $250 or $300 million salary cap that the salary cap was back in 2022, because the salary cap, due to all of the revenue the league generates, keeps rising. So the actual percentage of the Deshaun Watson salary cap hit lowers per year. So I'm not really even going to factor him in, and that's actually going to be the last that I mention him in this video, because I don't think he's going to have any impact on this team this year at all. So anyway, the reason that I worry about the Browns in 2025 and ultimately in 2026 is due in large part to the offensive line. DeJuan Jones was a prospect I liked a lot coming out of Ohio State back in 2023. And Browns fans, I know you guys definitely remember the TJ Watt game in DeJuan Jones' rookie year. He had 25 pass blocking snaps at right tackle, and he allowed a grand total of 0 pressures. And that was a very fun and exciting moment for DeJuan Jones. And during the 2023 season, I actually had an underrated rookie video come out, or rookies that aren't getting the love that they should, and included DeJuan Jones as a 4th-round rookie. But now that he is slated to start at left tackle because Jedrick Wills is no longer on the roster, now that we have to rely on him as a full-time starter, I have some concerns because this is a player, forget the 6'8", 360, just how big of a player he is, but this is a player that's had back-to-back season-ending injuries. He was on IR in 2023 in December, and then last year he fractured his ankle midway through the year. So this is a player coming off of back-to-back season-ending injuries, and obviously I worry about offensive line depth, not just for the Browns, but for everyone, because there are only so many good offensive linemen in the NFL, and that's going to be kind of a, not liability, but very much a week-by-week basis of how DeJuan Jones plays throughout the 25 season. Joel Bitonio, like we mentioned, is 33 going on 34. There will probably be a drop-off at some point, and you also have to factor in that exiting the 25 season of how are we going to eventually replace this guy. The same thing also applies to the rest of the offensive line with Ethan Posick, Wyatt Teller, and Jack Conklin, as all of those guys are on the wrong side of 30. So where I really worry about the Browns offense is the future of the offensive line. Now, you can make a case that that's more of a 2026 problem, but I really worry about having to replace all of these guys and what the state of the Browns offensive line would look like eventually when they do have to replace all of these guys, and that's where a lot of my concern lies. Now, we did mention guard Tevin Jenkins as a player coming over from the Bears during the offseason moves part, but I don't think Tevin Jenkins should automatically be viewed as the successor to Joel Bitonio, even though that could be the case. But I will also point out that he was signed to a 1-year, $3 million deal for a reason, and that he was not paid an average annual value of 10 or 12 or $15 million, and there's a reason for that. But that's my biggest concern with the 2025 Browns. And then, of course, you get into the quarterback discussion of a 40-year-old Joe Flacco who has been slinging it since I was in elementary school, and I'm now a 27-year-old man. So obviously there's some concern there with the age. And then you have Dillon Gabriel and Shedeur Sanders backing up Joe Flacco. And whenever you have uncertainty at the quarterback position, like the Browns do in terms of how many starts each player is going to have this year, in a lot of ways you really don't have an answer at the quarterback position. Now, with the quarterback room, you obviously know what you have in Joe Flacco at this point. You're going to be getting kind of an old-school gunslinging quarterback where he's going to make some throws that are beautiful. They're going to be some old-school classic Joe Flacco dropping the bucket plays to Jerry Jeudy 50 yards downfield, and then the very next drive you may have Joe Flacco throw an interception that looks like one of the worst interceptions you'll see all season. You know what you have with him. I think he'll start for probably at least the first month or so. I would be extremely shocked and honestly kind of disappointed for Browns fans if he starts 12 or 13 games this year, if Dillon Gabriel and Shedeur Sanders are not injured, of course, because you selected Dillon Gabriel in the top 100, and I personally had Shedeur Sanders in the 40s on my personal big board, so for the Browns to take him at pick 144 was a draft steal, whatever you may think of Shedeur Sanders. They had around a plus 100 draft valuation on the Shedeur Sanders selection, so I really hope that, we see both Dillon Gabriel and Shedeur Sanders play in 2025. Dillon Gabriel, to me, has all of the makings of a good long-term backup quarterback in the NFL. I don't think he's going to be a franchise quarterback, and with Shedeur Sanders, this is a complicated player. The Shedeur Sanders fan base is very vocal online, and after the Rams preseason game, they were claiming that the offensive line was told to not block good for him so that he could go through more adversity, and that they were purposely setting him up to fail, which was a stance, I'll just leave it at that. That was certainly a stance to die on, or a hill to die on for the Shedeur Sanders fan club, if you will. But Shedeur Sanders, one of the biggest things that he's going to have to work on in the NFL consistently is not drifting as much as he does, and he's also going to have to work on to consistently step up into the pocket and also take what's there for him. Now, there were certainly plays within the Rams game where there was nothing. There was not an NFL open window, as people like to say, where the NFL open window is a .001 second play where if he fits the football right here through a mailbox that his guy may have a chance at making the play. There were times within that Rams preseason game where it was very ugly, and it was whether the quarterback was Shedeur Sanders or Tom Brady, they were not going to succeed in that specific situation. But Pertaining to the starts for the Browns 2025 quarterbacks, if I had to give a breakdown of what I would like to see, I'd like to see Joe Flacco in that 4 to 5 starts area, Dylan Gabriel in that 5 to 6 starts area, and then Shedeur Sanders for the rest of the year, and really see what you have. Like I said, personally, I don't think Shedeur Sanders or Dylan Gabriel are going to be the long-term starters for the Browns, but there's a reason this team has 2 first-round picks in the 2026 draft, and that they are building for the long haul, and we saw that with their vision throughout the 2025 draft. One of the biggest things for the Browns offense this year that I think will help improve the Browns by default is simply not turning the ball over 34 times and then not having just 12 turnovers over the course of a 17 game on defense, and then also finishing dead last in points per game. If you say those couple of things, it's no reason that the Browns finished 3-14 last year. And that's one thing that I think will improve, is not turning the ball over 2 times per game and also finishing dead last. I don't think the Browns' weapons on offense are that bad, and the concerns with the offensive line is the age and how they're going to eventually replace those guys, but pertaining to 2025 specifically, I don't think the offensive line is that bad. So with the Browns this year, as long as they don't simply lose games the way that they did last year, or beat themselves, or simply take themselves out of games the way they did multiple times last year. I mean, they had a quarterback on the roster in 2024 and Dorian Thompson-Robinson have 0 passing touchdowns to 6 interceptions. You're not going to win games like that in today's NFL. I mean, you're not, right? So as long as the Browns simply don't lose games, this team is not going to be as bad as people think. Now, admittedly, whenever you are trotting out a combination of Joe Flacco, Dylan Gabriel, or Shedeur Sanders, I don't think you're going to win 9 or 10 or 11 games this year and be competing for a playoff spot. But I also don't think that they are going to be the laughing stock the way that some people think. I don't think the running back room with Jerome Ford, assuming we have Quinshot Judkins here, or Dylan Sampson, is a bad running back room, especially behind an offensive line that the Browns have. And my concern with the Browns offensive line was the age, not that Joel Bitonio, Wyatt Teller, and Jack Conklin are bad players when healthy, although unfortunately that has been troublesome for Jack Conklin over the past couple of years, and I hope that everything works out for the 2025 Browns. But that's kind of my thing with the Browns, is the future, and that's the concern with them. But for the 2025 Browns specifically, I think the receiving room, again, is okay. It's serviceable with Jerry Jeudy, Cedric Tillman, and Jamari Thrash, and there is room for Jamari Thrash to step up and be a legit wide receiver too in this offense. And what also has to be remembered, even within the receiving room, is the pressure is not going to be on all of the receivers to produce whenever they just invested another top 70 pick in Harold Fannin, or a top 75 pick in Harold Fannin, and we have 2 viable tight ends to catch passes in David Njoku and Harold Fannin. So I don't think the Browns are going to be this laughing stock the way that some people think. And again, assuming they do not turn the ball over 34 times and take themselves out of games, they're not going to roll over every single week the way that some people think. Now, in terms of a team ceiling, like we said, I'm not going to trust Joe Flacco and the Browns to go into Baltimore and win and beat Lamar Jackson and the Ravens with not just the season on the line, but with a big game on the line and a game that the Ravens have to win. I'm not going to say that. I don't know how many people actually would and legitimately believe that. So I do think the Browns team ceiling is rather low, and I do think it'll be anywhere from 6 to 7 wins. But the biggest thing with the 2025 Browns is I don't think they're going to be a pushover the way that some people just automatically assume and think that the Browns season is over before it starts. And there is legit reason to watch the Browns and to, watch this team for what they're going to be in the future. And honestly, I can't wait to see how it all plays out. So that's all I have for today's video. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, as I cannot thank you guys enough for the support. Thank you to Arena Club for sponsoring today's video, and until next time, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.